I walked in silently and didn't say a word. Just froze. My mill was eating while my mom stood washing dishes, trembling from the cold. My husband ripped the plate from her hand and screamed, "Stop doing dishes. Bring more food." I softly called my dad. 5 minutes later everything shifted and, you know that gut-wrenching moment? That feeling when your entire world just shatters? I'm talking about seeing someone you love, your own mother, humiliated, broken, and realizing the people you trusted most were systematically destroying her. What would you do when betrayal hits that close to home? I didn't start a scene. I just picked up my phone and called my father. And within 5 minutes, the very people who had been tormenting us were begging me for a quiet, peaceful divorce. But to truly understand how that nightmare became their final, inescapable judgment, we have to go back exactly 30 minutes. It was Sim, gripping the steering wheel of her SUV, knuckles white, fighting through a blinding snowstorm. My audit assignment in Chicago had finally wrapped up a day early. Honestly, auditing a massive logistics firm had completely drained me. All I dreamed of was one thing: walking into my warm, bright house, hugging my mother and my husband, and finally getting some decent sleep. This wasn't just some house. This custom home, nestled in the fancy sanctuary subdivision, was a sacrifice. My mother, Vivian Jones, had sold everything for it. Her solid, rural home in South Carolina. The land, the livestock, everything she'd built over decades. She poured it all into this house so Marcus, my husband, and I could have a respectable place to live. I remembered it so clearly. Mom, teary-eyed, handing stacks of cash to Marcus. All she'd asked for was a peaceful old age, close to her daughter. Marcus, that smooth talker, had sworn he'd treat her like a queen. The SUV glided to a stop by the tall, wrought iron gates. I decided against using the intercom. Didn't want to disturb anyone. I quietly opened the pedestrian gate with my key. The first-floor windows glowed brightly. Through the frosty air, I could smell roasting meat and heard loud, booming laughter. It was Denise Peterson, my mother-in-law, her distinctive cackle piercing the night. I managed a small, tired smile. Must be a party. I gently opened the front door, stepping into the foyer. The house smelled of expensive perfume and roast turkey. I took a deep breath, ready to shout, "Surprise!" But the words, they just caught in my throat. From the dining room, where the chandeliers sparkled, there was a wide, open archway into the kitchen. And that view, that single view broke my world in two. In the dining room, sitting at the massive mahogany table, was Denise Peterson. She wore a festive, deep burgundy dress. Before her sat platters of prime steak, gourmet fish appetizers, and bottles of high-end scotch. She was cheerfully regaling an unseen companion, popping another appetizer into her mouth. The dining room was warm, cozy, with a fire crackling merrily in the hearth. But the kitchen, oh, the kitchen was in icy darkness. The heat had been completely shut off. The window was cracked open, letting in a bitter, freezing draft. Huddled over the sink was my mother, Vivian Jones. She wore her old, worn winter coat, the one she'd brought from the farm, and a knitted shawl. She was trembling all over, her hands red and swollen from the icy water, frantically scrubbing a dinner plate. No steam rose from her lips. It was almost as cold in that kitchen as it was outside. I froze, couldn't even draw a breath. I saw my mother try to turn off the water, but the faucet only sputtered. There was no hot water. Conserving energy. They were conserving energy on the woman who had bought these very walls for them. At that exact moment, Marcus burst into the kitchen. He was in a crisp white shirt, flushed and content. But when he saw my mother, his face, it twisted with malice. He crossed the floor in 2 furious bounds. Vivian flinched, pulling her head down into her shoulders, trying to wipe the plate with the edge of her old coat. Marcus snatched the fine china from her hands with such force that she staggered back, hitting her hip against the counter. "Get your filthy hands off my new wedding china," he hissed, spitting slightly. "You want to break a plate that cost more than your whole life? Now get the food to our guests, lowlife. Move it." He shoved her, roughly, in the back, steering her toward the dining room like a disgraced servant. "Marcus, please, I'll be quick," Mom whispered, her voice shaking from tears and cold. "Shut up and serve my mother," Marcus roared. Then he just walked back into the warmth, casually adjusting his hair. I stood in the shadow of the hallway. My heart seemed to stop, then started beating with a heavy, muffled thud that echoed in my temples. The scream, the raw, primal scream, was trapped deep inside. It transformed, not into an outburst, but into a cold, calculated fury. I didn't charge in. I didn't yell. The scene wouldn't solve anything. The scene was pure emotion, and right now I needed action. I silently took a step back. Then another. I quietly opened the front door and slipped back out into the snowy night. The cold air burned my face, but it also cleared my thoughts. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady. I found a number in my contacts. A number Marcus thought was for a retirement home or some backwater relative in the sticks. "Dad?" It rang only once. "I'm listening, daughter," came his low, gravelly voice. "Dad?" I said, my voice dead. "Even. You're close. I was just pulling up. Wanted to surprise you. What's going on?" "Yeah." I cut him off. "Walk straight in right now. And bring the papers. All the papers. I ended the call. I stood on the porch for exactly 3 minutes, watching the falling snow. Then I wiped a non-existent tear, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door again. This time it was loud, confident, punctate with a slam. I stomped my boots loudly, shaking the snow off them, and walked into the foyer. Sim! Marcus's voice from the dining room was falsely cheerful. He rushed out to meet me, wiping his greasy lips with a napkin on the fly. You're back already? We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. He tried to hug me, but I dodged him, walking straight past him toward the dining table. Denise froze, a fork halfway to her mouth. Vivian, standing in the corner with a serving tray, went pale and lowered her gaze, trying to hide her red hands under her apron. Hello, Denise. I nodded at my mother-in-law without looking directly at her. Then I approached my mother. I took Vivian's freezing hands in mine. Why are you wearing a coat? And why is there no heat in the kitchen? Marcus nervously laughed, stepping between us. Oh, Sim, you know your mother. She has her quirks. She got hot. She opened the windows herself, and she put the coat on because, well, she got a little chilly. We told her, sit down. She just says, I want to help. I want to be useful. Useful, I repeated. And she also wanted to break your china herself, didn't she? What? Marcus stopped smiling. What are you talking about? I silently pulled out my phone, placed it in the center of the table right next to the platter of steak, and pressed the play button. The recording of Marcus's voice, clear and loud, broke the deadly silence. Get your filthy hands off my new wedding china. Now get the food to our guests. Lowlife, move it. Denise's face broke out in red splotches. Marcus's jaw dropped, but no sound came out. His eyes darted between the phone and his wife. Sim, that's taken out of context. He finally sputtered. You don't understand. She pushed my buttons. She did it on purpose. 5 minutes, I said, looking at my watch. You have 5 minutes to pack your bags. Are you kicking us out? Denise shrieked, jumping up from her chair. Out of my son's house? How dare you? This is our house. We're registered residents here. This house was bought with my mother's money. I cut her off in an icy tone. And you turned her into a slave. Legally speaking. Marcus suddenly straightened up, a cocky note entering his voice. Half the assets belong to me as your husband, and we're not going anywhere. Try to throw us out in the snow. I'll call the police. You have no right. At that exact moment, the heavy front door, which Marcus had locked with 3 deadbolts, swung open with a drawn-out, dreadful screech. A plume of frosty air surged into the house. Marcus and Denise flinched and spun around. Standing in the doorway was a tall, imposing man. He was 65, but he looked like a brick wall. He wore an expensive, perfectly fitted black cashmere coat. His gray hair was neatly slicked back, and his eyes held a kind of authority that made you want to disappear. This was James Davis. Not the frail old man with a fishing rod Marcus thought he was, but a man whose glare had once made suspects tremble in the district attorney's office. Behind him, 2 sturdy men in dark suits stepped out, silent as shadows, carrying leather briefcases. Good evening, James Davis said. His voice filled the entire space, drowning out the crackle of the fireplace. He wasn't yelling, but that baritone made the dishes rattle in the cabinet. Who are you? Marcus stammered, backing away. How did you get in? This is private property. James slowly pulled off his leather gloves, his heavy gaze fixed on his son-in-law. You're mistaken, young man. Private property is something that belongs to you, and this house, as of this minute, does not. My father walked into the room without taking off his boots. The 2 men followed. One of them placed a document with a notarized seal on the table in front of Marcus. Remember that private investor you borrowed $300,000 from last month to finish the roofing? James asked, walking up to the table and picking up a steak appetizer. He sniffed it with distaste and dropped it back on the plate. The one who agreed to give you the money against the collateral of all movable and immovable property? No questions asked. Marcus turned white. How do you know that? That was confidential. That was my guy. James smiled, but the smile was more terrifying than a snarl. I loaned you the money through an intermediary, and in the contract, which you idiot signed without looking, there was one little clause. Clause 4.2. It stated the immediate confiscation of the collateral if payment was late by even 1 day. Marcus gulped hard. But the payment was yesterday. I forgot. I thought 1 day wouldn't matter. It matters, James Davis said, nodding to his men. The deadline passed at midnight last night. This house, the furniture, that china, and even your socks are now my property. You have 0 minutes to pack. Get out of here. One of the security men silently took a roll of bright orange stickers from his briefcase. Ignoring Marcus's protests, he slapped the first tag right onto the soup tureen from the new china set. The sticky label lay squarely across the gold-plated pattern. What are you doing? Marcus shrieked, lunging for the table. That's collectible porcelain. The adhesive will ruin the enamel. The second guard gently but firmly pushed him away with his hand, like swatting an annoying fly, and stuck the next sticker onto the back of the antique chair Denise had just been sitting in. Inventory, James said. walking toward the fireplace and warming his hands. All of this is collateral for the debt now. Any attempt to remove, sell, or damage an item will be treated as felony theft. He motioned to his men. Keep going, guys. The TV, the coats in the closet, the appliances, everything goes on the list. Denise, who had been playing the lady of the house moments before, slid down the wall. Her face was gray. Jim, Yuri Fedorovich, darling, she wailed, clasping her hands in prayer. We're family. How can you do this? The boy made a mistake. It happens. We'll pay everything back. Why be so cruel right away? We're family. Family? James repeated without turning his head. Family is that woman you forced to wash dishes in freezing water. You two are parasites. I walked to the table, swept up the remains of the feast. The steak, the fish, the appetizers, and dumped it all into the trash can with a clang. Get out, I said quietly. Right now. I don't want to see either of you in this house for another second. Marcus, realizing that pleading was useless, suddenly changed his expression. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a nasty, rat-like glint. He exchanged a look with his mother. Denise, catching his eye, suddenly stopped crying. She straightened up, adjusted her hair, and reached into her purse. We're not going anywhere, she announced, pulling out a sheet of paper, folded into quarters. And you, Sim, and your XDA. She triumphantly slapped the paper onto the table in front of my father. What is this? He asked, touching the sheet distastefully. A certificate of residency. Denise smiled maliciously. Marcus registered me here a week ago, and he's registered himself. This is our only residence. And according to the law, she raised a finger. It's forbidden to evict people from their only home into the cold during winter, even for debt. Sue all you want. The courts will take years. And until then, we live here. Marcus beamed, seeing his father-in-law frown. They had prepared. They knew I might rebel sooner or later, and they had set their trap in advance. Dad. I looked at my father questioningly. James skimmed the document, clenching his jaw. They're formally correct, he conceded. Without a court order, the police won't remove them right now. It's winter. Exactly. Marcus flopped down onto the sofa, right on top of an orange sticker. So call off your goons, old man. We're staying, and we'll live just as we were. I looked at my husband's smug face. Everything inside me had burned out, leaving only cold ash. Fine, I said. You're staying. But you won't live as you were. I turned and went upstairs. Marcus tried to shout something after me, but the guard stepped toward him, and he bit his tongue. I walked into the master suite, spacious, with a huge bed and a separate bathroom that Marcus had immediately claimed after moving in, banishing my mother to the tiny guest room on the first floor. I opened the closet and methodically began throwing Marcus's belongings out into the corridor. Expensive suits, shirts, ties flew over the banister and landed on the floor below, right at Denise's feet. What are you doing? Marcus bellowed from downstairs. Clearing the room for the lady of the house. I shouted back. Mom, come upstairs. You live here now. Vivian, still in her coat, fearfully shrank against the wall in the foyer. Sim, no, I can stay downstairs. She started. No, Mom, you're coming upstairs. Into a hot bath and a soft bed. And those two. I nodded toward my husband and mother-in-law. They can sleep wherever they like, even on the doormat. I'm taking the keys to the master suite. That night, the house turned into a battlefield. I locked myself and my mother in the suite, listening to Marcus downstairs, arguing with the guards, trying to secure a spot on the couch. James Davis had left, leaving 2 of his men to stand watch in the living room. In the morning, the war moved into a guerrilla phase. I woke up freezing. The radiators were icy. I went down to the utility room and found the window flung wide open and the boiler shut off. An error code was blinking on the control panel. Denise was sitting in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea from her own mug. The only one the guards had allowed her to keep off the inventory list. Oh, something broke, she trilled, noticing me. Sim, your mother probably pressed the wrong button with her clumsy hands yesterday. Technology is complicated. It's not for farm folk. Now we'll freeze until you can call a technician. And technicians are expensive these days. She was openly gloating. She knew I wouldn't let my mother freeze and would fix everything at my own expense. It was a war of attrition. I silently walked past her to the refrigerator. It was empty. The groceries I had brought yesterday were gone. We ate. My mother-in-law smiled. Stress gave us an appetite. I didn't yell. I pulled out my phone and called the security agency my firm used. An hour later, a broad-shouldered security guard in uniform stood right by the kitchen entrance. This man will monitor the integrity of the life support systems and the food supply, I announced, looking my mother-in-law straight in the eye. Any attempt to approach the boiler or the refrigerator without my permission will be physically prevented. No one will give you any more food. If you want to eat, go to the store with your own money. Denise choked on her tea. I returned to the master suite where I had set up a makeshift office. I was an auditor. My job was to find what people were trying to hide. And now I was about to conduct the most thorough audit of my life. Marcus's laptop lay on the desk. He had panicked and forgotten it in the living room when James started the inventory, and the guards had simply brought the computer to me as property. I knew the password. Marcus was too lazy to change 123456. I opened the banking app. Marcus's accounts were almost empty, but I was interested in the transaction history. I exported a statement for the past 3 years and began compiling a spreadsheet. My eyes scanned the rows. Restaurants, designer clothes, cash withdrawals. The amounts were huge. Where had the money that my mother and I had given for construction gone? But one regular transaction caught my attention. Every first of the month, $5,000. Payment description: residential lease payment. I frowned. What lease? We had lived in Denise's condo until moving here. And then we were here. Why was Marcus renting an apartment? I clicked on the payment details. The recipient was masked, but the address was listed. Peachtree Street 100, Unit 4B, downtown Atlanta. A luxury high-rise. I opened the documents folder on the desktop. Deep inside the system folders was a file, Agreement Peachtree. I opened it. It was a 3-year lease for a 2-bedroom apartment. Payer, Marcus. And in the residence section was a name that made my vision swim. Tiffany Wells. I remembered the previous week. Denise had brought over a modest young woman with a round belly. "This is my goddaughter Tiffany, darling," the mother-in-law had chirped. Poor thing, her husband left her. She needs support so badly. I had felt sorry for her then, giving her a bag of maternity clothes and even offering help with doctors. Tiffany Wells had been living in an apartment paid for by Marcus for 3 years. For 3 years, my husband had been supporting another woman with the money he stole from his own family. And judging by the timing of the goddaughter's pregnancy, the child was not from the runaway husband at all. I slammed the laptop lid shut with a sound like a gunshot. An hour later, I was standing at the door of Unit 4B on Peachtree Street. I wore a uniform jacket borrowed from one of my firm's drivers and a baseball cap pulled low. In my hands was a box with the logo of an expensive children's boutique. I rang the bell. The door didn't open immediately. Tiffany appeared in the doorway. She wore a silk robe unbuttoned at the chest. Her belly was quite noticeable. "Delivery from Marcus Peterson," I mumbled, trying not to look up. "Paid for." "Oh, finally." Tiffany beamed, grabbing the box. "Marcus promised they would deliver it today. It's the outfit for the baby to wear home." She stepped inside the hallway without closing the door and eagerly began tearing open the packaging. I stepped in after her, taking off my cap. "I hope the size is right," I said in my normal voice. Tiffany froze. She slowly turned around. The box slipped from her hands. "You," she whispered. "What are you doing here?" I was looking not at the mistress's face, but at her neck. There, a thin gold chain with a vintage ruby pendant framed in small diamonds sparkled in the opening of the robe. It was my grandmother's family necklace, the one that had disappeared from my jewelry box 6 months ago. Marcus had claimed then that the cleaning lady must have stolen it, or that I myself had lost it. "That's a beautiful necklace," I said softly, stepping closer. "Grandma used to say it only brings luck to honest women." Tiffany instinctively covered the jewelry with her hand. "Get out. I'm calling the police right now. Marcus will be here soon." "Marcus isn't coming," I chuckled. "Marcus has a few little problems with residency and his conscience right now, and I wouldn't call the police. The report for the theft of this necklace has been at the precinct for 6 months. All I have to do is make one phone call, and you'll be giving birth in a jail infirmary." Tiffany paled. Her bravado began to crumble. "I didn't steal it," she shrieked. "It was a gift. Denise gave it to me. She said it was her family heirloom." "Take it off," I commanded, holding out my hand. "Right now." Tiffany, sobbing, unclasped the fastener and threw the necklace into my palm. "Choke on it," she spat venomously. "It will all be mine soon anyway. The house and Marcus." "The house?" I repeated, pocketing the necklace. "Yes, the house." Tiffany suddenly smiled maliciously, stroking her belly. "Denise promised that as soon as that old hag your mother is put into a nursing home, Marcus and I will move in. That's where she belongs. She doesn't know what she's doing anymore anyway, and the baby needs fresh air. Not this dusty apartment." My vision narrowed. So it wasn't just about the money. They weren't just planning to fleece Vivian Jones. They planned to destroy her, declare her incompetent, and lock her away in a state facility to make room for their new family. "Thank you for the information," I said in an icy tone. "Now I know everything I need to know." I turned and left, leaving Tiffany bewildered in the middle of the hallway. That evening, a suffocating silence reigned in the house, but I decided to break it. I set the table in the dining room, not for guests, but for family. I set the plates, lit the candles, and invited everyone to dinner. Marcus and Denise came down cautiously. They were starving. The guard in the kitchen was diligently doing his job, and they had been surviving all day on crackers found in their rooms. Seeing the roasted chicken, Marcus swallowed hard. "Sit," I invited them with a gesture. Vivian was already sitting at the head of the table, dressed in her best new spring dress that I had retrieved from the suitcase. She looked confused, but held herself with dignity. I sat across from my husband. The ruby on my neck glowed scarlet in the candlelight. Denise, who had reached for the bread, froze. Her eyes widened, fixed on the jewelry. A fork clattered onto a plate. Pretty, isn't it? I asked, touching the stone. I found it today in a very unexpected place. On the neck of a certain pregnant goddaughter. Marcus choked on his water. He coughed, his face turning crimson. You went to see her? He choked out. I did. I nodded calmly. A sweet girl. Very candid. She told me all about your plans. The retirement home for Mom. The move-in. Vivian gasped and pressed a hand to her chest. Retirement home? She whispered. Daughter. What is she talking about? She's talking, Mom, about how these people. I swept my hand over my husband and mother-in-law. We're planning to declare you mentally unfit, to move in here with Marcus's new wife and their baby. That's a lie. Marcus jumped up. She's lying about everything. Tiffany is just... She's just an acquaintance. I silently picked up the TV remote and pressed the power button. On the huge screen in the living room, a photo of the lease agreement appeared. Marcus's name, Tiffany's name, signatures, dates. 3 years of lies in high definition. You paid for her apartment with the money we were saving for Mom's medical care. I said. You lied to my face for 3 years. You have a child on the side. And you wanted to throw my mother out of her own home like trash. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He was crushed. The evidence was irrefutable. The silence in the room became sticky, heavy. Felt like someone was about to scream or beg for forgiveness. But then a laugh broke out. Quiet, dry, rasping laugh. Denise Peterson was laughing. She neatly cut a piece of chicken, put it in her mouth, and after chewing looked at me with an expression of complete superiority. There was no fear or shame in her eyes, only cold calculation. So you found out? She asked, wiping her lips with a napkin. What's your point? You think you won? You think you can throw us out now in disgrace? I don't think. I know, I replied. Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce and eviction. Eviction? Denise smirked again. Did you look closely at the deed for the house, smarty pants? Sure. The house is in your mother's name. The house? Yes. The mother-in-law corrected. The walls, the roof, the foundation. But the land it sits on. She paused dramatically, savoring the moment. The land, darling, belongs to me. I frowned. What nonsense. My mother bought the lot. Your mother provided the money, Denise corrected. And I handled the paperwork. Remember that power of attorney Vivian signed 3 years ago to handle all the construction affairs? There was one small line in there. Right to purchase real estate in my name. The mother-in-law leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. So, the half-acre lot that this wonderful custom home sits on was purchased in my name. And I have the deed. Vivian cried softly. Denise, how could you? We had an agreement. It was all for my son, darling. Denise snapped. Not for you, you country bumpkin. She turned back to me, her voice hard as steel. So, the breakdown is this, daughter-in-law. The house is yours, but the land is mine. I demand that you move your house off my land. Tear it down or pay me rent. Say $20,000 a month, starting today. I stared at her, understanding that this wasn't a bluff. This woman had planned everything from the start. She wasn't just a thief. She was a professional predator. And if we don't pay? I asked. Then I'll sue to have the illegal structure demolished. Denise shrugged. And believe me, I'll win. I have all the paperwork. She picked up a chicken leg and took a bite with relish. So no one is going anywhere. Tiffany will move in here as soon as she gives birth. And you and your mother will live in the guest annex and work off the rent. And that's my final word. Denise wasn't kidding. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a heavy engine roaring outside. I looked out the window and saw an old, rusty dump truck slowly pulling into the gates and parking directly across the only exit from the property. The driver, a grumpy guy in a greasy jacket, jumped out of the cab, locked the door, and walked away on the road without looking back. The dump truck completely blocked everything. No one could drive out and no one could drive in. What does this mean? I asked, descending to the kitchen where Denise was victoriously sipping coffee. It's my land, the mother-in-law replied without looking up from her mug. And I decide who and what parks on it. By noon, it became clear that this wasn't just a petty stunt. It was a siege. A septic pump truck arrived at the gates. The septic tank was overflowing from the day before. The driver honked, got out, looked at the blocking dump truck, spat, and drove off. The hose simply couldn't reach the tank cap over the fence. An hour later, an odor appeared in the house. Faint at first, then unbearable. Using the plumbing became impossible. The courier with the week's worth of groceries I had ordered also turned around at the gates. Denise went out onto the porch and yelled with a smirk that entry onto private property was forbidden. If he tried to climb the fence, she would call the police for trespassing. She's starving us and drowning us in our own sewage, I concluded, looking at the empty refrigerator. By evening, the house had turned into an icy, foul-smelling tomb. Vivian sat in her room wrapped in a blanket and crying. Sim, honey? She sniffled when I checked on her. Let's just leave. Let them choke on this house. I can't take this anymore. The smell, the cold. I'm old. I don't need much. We can rent a room somewhere. No, I cut her off. My voice was tight with tension. If we leave now, we lose. We'll give them everything you worked for your entire life. I won't let that creature win. A cold fire burned in my eyes. I wasn't going to surrender. I had worked in logistics for 15 years. I knew how to deliver cargo to the most inaccessible points in the country. Surely I could organize the provisioning of my own home. Late that night, when Denise and Marcus had fallen asleep, confident in their victory, I went out into the backyard. Behind the shed, there was a small gap in the fence, known only to the neighborhood cats. In the darkness beyond the fence, headlights flashed. It was my company's service pickup truck. The driver, an old acquaintance of mine, silently tossed 2 heavy backpacks over the fence. They contained food, bottled water, portable chemical toilets, and gas burners. "Thank you, Sergeant," I whispered into the darkness. "Hang in there, Jones," the driver replied. "If you need it, we'll drop supplies from a helicopter. We wouldn't starve or drown in sewage." The blockade was broken, but defense wasn't victory. I needed to go on the offensive. The next morning, leaving my mother under the protection of the security guard, I walked past the dump truck and headed for the city. My destination was the county archive. I knew that if Denise was talking about legality, there had to be a loophole. People like my mother-in-law didn't play by the rules. They looked for technicalities. The archive was dusty and quiet. The woman archivist, recognizing my last name, brightened. "Oh, you're James Davis's daughter. What a man he was. Such a district attorney. I remember how he saved us from the mob back in the 90s. Of course. We'll find everything." Half an hour later, a file containing the history of the property lot lay before me. I flipped through the yellowed pages. Here was the first owner. Here was the second. And here was the bill of sale in Denise Peterson's name. Date: 3 years ago. The sale amount was laughable. The appraised value was undervalued by a factor of 10. But the most interesting thing was at the end. The notary's signature. I Hawthorne. I frowned. I had heard that name. Hawthorne was known in the city as a black market real estate lawyer. He handled transactions that smelled of crime from a mile away. Houses belonging to deceased lonely seniors, strange wills, disputed land. I found the address of Hawthorne's law office. I drove there immediately, hoping to corner him. If he had falsified documents or processed the sale improperly, it was a chance to annul the mother-in-law's ownership. The office was closed. A sign on the door read, "For lease." I went into the neighboring stationery store. "Excuse me, did the lawyer Hawthorne move?" I asked the saleswoman. "Moved all right," the woman snorted. "To the grave. Died 6 months ago. Heart attack, or maybe he was helped along. Who knows? With his line of work." I felt the ground dropping out from under my feet. The key witness was dead. Loose ends tied up. I walked outside, sat on a bench, and covered my face with my hands. A dead end. Denise had won. She had even foreseen this. But the auditor's brain wouldn't give up. I remembered the file in the archive. It held more than just agreements. There were receipts, appendices, copies of payment records. Where did Denise Peterson, who had worked her whole life as a simple bookkeeper for the HOA and was now on retirement, get the money for even the undervalued price of the land? $300,000. That wasn't pocket change. I returned to the archive. "I need to see the transaction appendix," I requested, the confirmation of payment. The archivist brought another thin folder. I opened it. A copy of a bank transfer. Payer: Denise Peterson. Amount: $300,000. Bank: City Credit Union. I photographed the document. I called an acquaintance in the bank security department. "Alex, run this payment, please. It's urgent." "Where did the money come from to the sender's account before this transaction?" "Half an hour, Sim," Alex replied. Those 30 minutes stretched into an eternity. I paced in circles in the park outside the archive, kicking the snow. If the money was clean, savings, inheritance, anything legal, then all was lost. The phone chimed. A message from Alex. "Interesting picture, Sim. The money was deposited into your lady's account the day before the transaction. One single transfer from a corporate entity, the Sanctuary HOA. Payment description: road repair and infrastructure replacement." I froze. The Sanctuary HOA. That was our subdivision. The same upscale subdivision where our house stood. And then the puzzle clicked. Denise had been the treasurer for the HOA for the past 5 years. All the neighbors knew she was an activist, constantly collecting money for security gates, guards, and asphalt. I opened the neighborhood chat on my phone. The latest messages were full of anger. "Where's the road? Why are there potholes again? We all paid $10,000. Where is the result?" Denise had replied to everyone. "The contractor let us down. We're looking for a new one. We're short on funds. Need to raise more." She hadn't just bought the land with someone else's money. She had stolen that money from her own neighbors. The same wealthy, influential women she loved to brag to about her status. She took the general fund for road repairs, transferred it to herself under a fake contract, and used it to buy the lot she was now holding hostage. The entire neighborhood, every family, every house, had paid for the land on which Denise Peterson was playing the Baroness. I slowly lowered my phone. A cold, Predatory smile touched my lips. A witness was unnecessary. The notary was unnecessary. I held a bomb in my hands that could blow up not only the fence, but Denise Peterson's entire life, and the fuse was already lit. I didn't go to the police. Filing a police report would be too slow, too bureaucratic. It would give Denise time to find a lawyer and drag the case out. No, I needed an immediate effect. I needed a social, bloodless, but no less brutal form of justice. I opened the neighborhood chat, the Sanctuary Wives. This chat included all the women Denise had so painstakingly fawned over, whose approval she sought, whose recipes she copied, wives of executives, businesswomen, socialites. I typed a short message. Urgent meeting at the clubhouse in 1 hour. Topic: where did our road funds disappear? Come if you don't want to keep paying scammers. Documents will be provided. Send. An hour later, the meeting room at the local clubhouse was packed. All the women, dressed in expensive coats and carrying designer bags, were there. Annoyed that they had been pulled away from their errands, but intrigued by the scent of scandal. I stepped onto the stage. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I connected my laptop to the projector. Good afternoon, I said into the microphone. My voice was firm. Many of you know my mother-in-law, Denise Peterson. She's our treasurer. She constantly tells us that the till is empty, that we need to chip in more, that contractors are letting us down. She's been saying we're short on funds for 3 years. A murmur of agreement ran through the hall. Now look, at the screen. I brought up the first spreadsheet. This is a statement from our HOA account. Here are the deposits from you all. Millions of dollars. And here's an expenditure. $300,000 went to a shell corporation called Construction Services, supposedly for road repairs on Forest Lane. But there are still potholes there, shouted a woman in the front row, the wife of a local congressman. I ruined my suspension there yesterday. Correct. I nodded. Because there was no repair. And here's the statement from the Construction Services account. I clicked the slide. On the very same day the money came from us, it was transferred to Denise Peterson's personal account. The hall gasped. And the next day, I switched the slide. Denise Peterson used that money to pay for the purchase of a residential lot. The very lot where the house she lives in stands. She bought the land under her house with your money. The silence in the room became deafening. Then it exploded. It wasn't just a murmur. It was the roar of enraged lionesses. These women could forgive gossip. They could forgive bad taste in clothing. But they would never forgive being played for fools. Denise hadn't just stolen. She had humiliated them, forcing them to pay for her security while she played the aristocrat. Where is she? The congressman's wife yelled, standing up. Let's go see her right now. She's home, I replied calmly. Hosting a dinner for her future daughter-in-law. The crowd surged toward the exit. I walked last. I knew what was about to happen. This would be worse than any police action. This was a social execution. Meanwhile, in the house, Denise was on cloud 9. The blockade had worked. Sim had disappeared earlier that morning. Apparently, she had run off to find money for the rent. The mother-in-law had set the table in the living room. The guard in the kitchen, following my order not to interfere, merely watched sullenly. Tiffany was their guest. Eat up, sweetie. Eat up. Denise cooed, serving her salad. You need your strength. The other one will break soon. Sign all the papers and we'll be set. You'll be the lady of the house here, and Vivian will find a cheap care home somewhere far away, Denise said with a dismissive wave. Tiffany smiled contentedly, stroking her belly. Marcus sat beside her, agreeing with his mother, already mentally arranging his furniture in his father-in-law's study. Suddenly, a commotion came from the street, a rising tide of voices, like the surf. What's all that noise? Denise frowned. Did that crazy woman start a protest? She walked to the window, pulled back the heavy curtain, and went white. A mob was standing by the gates. Dozens of women, and they weren't just onlookers. They were the very socialites Denise dreamed of having tea with. But now their faces were distorted with rage. Denise, come out, you thief! The congressman's wife screamed, shaking her fist. Give us back our money. Open the gates, you con artist. We know you bought the land with our funds. Denise recoiled from the window as if from fire. The curtains slipped from her trembling fingers. They know, she whispered. How did they find out? The first rock flew into the gates, followed by a clod of dirt. Marcus, she shrieked. Do something. Call security. Marcus rushed to the window, saw the enraged crowd, and understood. This is the end. The end of his mother, her reputation, her influence, her place in society. If he went out now to defend her, they would tear him apart along with her. Those women would ruin them. They would shut every door in the city in their faces. He looked at his mother. She was pacing the room, clutching her chest, grabbing her phone, clinging to the edge of the table. She looked pathetic. I can't, Marcus mumbled. Mom, these are your problems. I had nothing to do with this. What? Denise froze. You're abandoning me? Your own mother. I have to think about the baby. Marcus nodded at the frightened Tiffany. We can't handle this stress. We're leaving. He grabbed Tiffany's arm and dragged her toward the back door. Marcus, wait! His mother cried after him, but he wasn't listening. He dashed into the foyer, snatched his overnight bag that he hadn't unpacked since yesterday, and frantically began stuffing documents into it. Passport, driver's license, wallet. Faster, Tiffany, faster, he urged. We'll go to your apartment in the city. Lie low until this blows over. But Marcus, Tiffany whined. What about the house? You promised. To hell with the house. Can't you see what's happening? They're going to lynch us. He pulled out his phone to call an Uber. The app returned a payment error. What the heck? Marcus frowned. Tried another card. Transaction declined. The third card. Blocked. He logged into his mobile bank. A red message flashed on the screen. Accounts frozen. Suspicious activity. No, 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 he whispered, stabbing the screen with his finger. This is a mistake. This can't be happening. I appeared in the foyer doorway. I had walked in through the front entrance, which the crowd wasn't yet storming, giving me a clear path. I stood with my arms crossed, watching my husband with icy calm. Where are you going in such a rush, darling? I asked. Sim. Marcus scrambled toward me. Sim, what's wrong with the cards? Why aren't they working? Unblock them. You're an auditor. You messed something up. I didn't mess anything up, I replied. I filed for divorce this morning, and as part of the asset division procedure, I filed a request for an asset freeze. And also, I paused, savoring the moment. As a certified auditor, I am obligated to report suspicious financial schemes. Your transfers to Tiffany's apartment came from the same accounts your mother used to launder the stolen HOA money to the bank. You're both accomplices in a money laundering case. Marcus dropped his phone. You blocked everything? Absolutely everything. You can't even buy a bus ticket. You're bankrupt, Marcus. And you're not going anywhere. Tiffany, hearing the word bankrupt, let go of Marcus's arm. She looked at him, then at me, then at the enraged crowd outside the window. You said you had money, she hissed. You said you were rich. Tiffany, it's temporary. I'll fix everything. Marcus pleaded, trying to grab her elbow. Don't touch me, she screamed. You penniless loser. At that moment, a brick flew into the living room window. The glass shattered with a crash. Denise, sitting on the floor in the center of the room, covered her head with her hands and wailed. I watched this and felt no pity. I felt only cold satisfaction. The trap had sprung. The rats were cornered. Another stone hit the wall with a dull thud. Somewhere, shards of glass rattled on the porch. Outside, the crowd was raging, demanding blood and money. And inside the house, the air thickened with hatred, becoming dense and suffocating. Marcus, realizing there was nowhere to run, and his accounts were empty, slowly turned to his mother, who was still on the floor among the broken vase shards. This is your fault, he snarled. His face was contorted. This is your stupid schemes. Nobody will ever find out, Marcus. Everything is under control, Marcus. Well, there's your control. We're going to be killed because of your greed. Denise raised her head. In her eyes, usually full of arrogance, there was now a look of animal fear, which quickly changed to the rage of a cornered rat. My fault? She screeched, scrambling to her feet. I did all this for you, so you could live in a decent home, not a hovel, so you could have status. And you couldn't even keep your woman in line. If you hadn't brought that damn auditor here, we'd be living like kings. Don't you dare call her that, Marcus roared. Sim isn't a thief. You're the criminal. You stole from the neighbors. You set me up. My accounts are frozen because of you. I'm broke. You're broke because you're weak. His mother spat in his face. You've always been a mama's boy who couldn't take a single step without me telling you to. I found you a wife. I found you a mistress. I built you a house. And all you can do is whine. Marcus reared back, but didn't dare strike. His hand trembled and dropped weakly. He paced the room like a caged animal. Tiffany, huddled in the corner of the sofa, watched the spectacle in silence with an expression of disgust. Suddenly, Marcus stopped. His gaze fell on me, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the agony of their family with cold curiosity. A switch flipped in Marcus's head. Fear and greed whispered. The only way out was betrayal. He approached me with quick steps, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Sim, listen, he rushed, grabbing my sleeve. We need to talk. Alone. I jerked my arm away with distaste. What do we have to talk about, Marcus? A deal. I can help you. Seriously, let's go to the kitchen, please. I hesitated for a second, then nodded. Fine. 5 minutes. I turned and headed for the kitchen. Marcus, throwing a quick glance at his mother, who had started wailing again, hurried after me. Tiffany remained in the living room, glued to her phone. The kitchen was quiet. The guard who was standing by the door went out into the hall at a sign from me, leaving us alone. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. Sim, I get it. I was an idiot, he began, trying to sound sincere. My mother messed with my head. She's been pressuring me my whole life, but I can fix everything. How? I asked dryly, pouring myself a glass of water. I know about the land, about the HOA scheme. I know where she keeps the originals of the dark ledger. I saw her forge the neighbors' signatures. He stepped closer, looking into my eyes. I can give an official statement on record. I'll turn her in, lock, stock, and barrel. I'll tell them how she stole, how she bribed that lawyer. You won't even have to prove anything. My testimony will be enough to send her to prison for 10 years, and the land will go back to the HOA. And then you can buy it fair and square. He looked at me hopefully. He was selling his mother for $30,000 and a one-way ticket. I remained silent. I looked at the man I had lived with for 10 years and didn't recognize him. Or rather, I finally saw the real him. Cowardly. Ready to sell anyone for his own comfort. Fine, I said. Write it out. I took a sheet of paper and a pen from a drawer and tossed them on the counter. Write a full confession that you knew about your mother's schemes, but kept quiet, and where the documents are detailed. Go. Marcus snatched the pen. His hands were shaking with impatience. He began scribbling, muttering under his breath. I, Marcus Peterson, confirmed Denise Peterson illegally. The kitchen door quietly opened. Vivian Jones stood in the doorway. She had heard everything. She had been standing in the hall, her ear pressed to the door. Every word from her son-in-law had fallen into her heart like a drop of acid. But instead of pain, clarity came. Vivian walked into the kitchen. She walked not with the shuffling gait of a beaten old woman, but with firm, purposeful steps. Her back was straight. Marcus looked up from the paper and froze. He had never seen his mother-in-law like this. There were no tears in her eyes. No pleading. There was steel. Vivian walked up to the counter. Marcus instinctively pressed himself into the chair. Vivian, we're just agreeing on terms with Sim. He started to stammer. A ringing slap interrupted him mid-sentence. Marcus's head snapped to the side. His cheek instantly flared red. It was not the blow of a weak woman, but the blow of a person who had endured too much for too long. Mom, I gasped. Vivian looked down at her son-in-law. Don't you dare, she said quietly but distinctly. Don't you dare bargain. You sold your conscience a long time ago, but selling your mother? That's the lowest thing, even for trash like you. But I'm doing this for you. Marcus shrieked, clutching his cheek. To get the land back. I don't need your handouts. Vivian cut him off. And I don't need your testimony. I want you to suffer. To feel what it's like to be betrayed by the ones closest to you. To be discarded like a useless thing. She turned to me. Don't give him a dime, daughter. Let him sign it for free, or let him go to hell. Marcus looked at the paper, then at me. He knew the money was gone, but the fear of prison was stronger. If he didn't sign, I would turn him in as an accomplice. If he did, maybe they would lighten his sentence. Fine, he yelled. Fine, I'll sign it, but you let me go. He furiously scrawled his signature under the confession. There, happy? I turned her in. I wrote everything down. Now let me leave. I took the sheet, checked the signature, carefully folded the paper, and put it in my pocket. Thank you, Marcus, I said. Very thorough. Then I reached for the counter, picked up a cloth napkin that had been lying next to a fruit bowl, and pulled out my phone. The screen was lit. Call was in progress. Speakerphone was on. Marcus went cold. Who is that? He whispered. Tiffany. Did you hear all of that? I asked loudly into the phone. A hysterical, shrieking voice came from the speaker. It was so loud that Marcus staggered back. Hear it? I heard everything. You! It was Tiffany. She was sitting in the living room, literally just on the other side of the wall. But I had called her mobile phone 5 minutes ago before going into the kitchen and asked her to listen to something interesting. Tiffany, baby, I can explain everything. Marcus stammered, trying to grab the phone. Don't you dare call me. Tiffany was screaming into the receiver. You sold your own mother for $30,000. You miserable failure. You're broke. You're a traitor. I thought you were a man, but you're a worm. Tiffany, we have a baby. Marcus pleaded. A baby? Tiffany burst out laughing. And the sound was worse than the slap. I don't care about your baby. I'm calling Wade, my ex, right now. He's an idiot. But at least he has a truck, and he doesn't sell his mama. You can rot in prison. I'm leaving right now. The call ended with a short series of beeps. Silence hung in the kitchen. Marcus stood, staring at the phone in my hand as if it were a pistol that had just been fired into his face. In that minute, he lost everything. The wife who despised him, the mother he had betrayed who would now curse him, the mistress who turned out to be just as predatory as he was, and abandoned him at the first sign of trouble, and the money and the house. He was utterly alone. Vivian looked at him with disgusted pity, wiped the hand that had struck him on her apron as if shaking off dirt, and walked out of the kitchen. I silently pointed to the back door. Go, Marcus. Before the neighbors break through the front entrance. Go. Walk. Go to nowhere. Marcus, swaying like a drunk, stumbled toward the exit. He opened the door to the cold, dark night. The wind howled out there, but that chill was nothing compared to the emptiness inside him. The back door slammed shut, and Marcus disappeared into the darkness. I locked the deadbolts, checked the latch, and leaned my forehead against the cold wood. The silence in the house was deceptive. It wasn't peace. It was the lull before the final blow. Denise Peterson was sitting in her ground floor room. She had heard her son leave, heard Tiffany's screams as she fled through the main door, once the crowd of neighbors had thinned out, scared off by the late-night cold. Denise was alone. She sat in the dark, rocking on her chair. Only one thought spun in her head, pulsing like an abscess. They took everything from me. The land, the money, my reputation, my son. Tomorrow the police would come. Tomorrow they would lead her away in handcuffs while those sanctuary hags jeered at her. No, she whispered, her lips twisting into a mad smile. That won't happen. If this house isn't mine, then it won't be anyone's. She waited until the footsteps upstairs had faded. Sim and Vivian, exhausted beyond measure, were finally asleep. The guard in the kitchen had also dozed off, sitting on a chair. Denise, silent as a shadow, crept into the hallway. In her hand, she clutched a key ring for the garage. Her plan was simple and insane. Fire. The home insurance policy was in her name. Another one of her little tricks. If the house burned down, she would get the payout. And the documents, all the documents proving her land scheme, would burn with the walls. No one would be able to prove a thing. She would say the wiring shorted out. Old wiring installed by those clumsy contractors. She walked into the garage. It smelled of gasoline and old rubber. In the corner stood jerry cans, old metal, heavy. She had stored them there for years, just in case. Now the time had come. Denise struggled to twist the cap off the first can. The sharp chemical smell hit her nose. She began pouring the contents onto the floor. The gasoline spread in a dark puddle over the concrete, creeping toward the shelving unit filled with paint cans, toward the wooden frame leading into the main house. Burn. All of you. Burn. She whispered, splashing the second can onto the walls. It's mine. It's all mine. She pulled out a lighter. A tiny flame flickered in the darkness, illuminating her face, distorted by madness. Well, here we go. She cackled and tossed the lighter into the puddle. The fire ignited instantly with a dull whump like a beast released from a cage. The flame licked the walls, greedily attacking the oily rags in the corner. Heat blasted her face. Denise backed toward the exit, but then realized that the garage door leading outside was jammed. She yanked the handle. Useless. The old lock, which should have been oiled long ago, was seized tight. The fire was already cutting off the path back into the house. She was caught in the trap she had set for everyone else. Help! She screamed, pounding her fists on the metal door. Fire! Outside, parked by the gates, James Davis was dozing in his car. He hadn't left. He knew cornering a rat was dangerous and had decided to personally stand watch until morning. A flash in the garage window made him open his eyes. An orange reflection danced on the snow. Damn it! He barked. He jumped out of the car, shouting to his men. Ram the gates now! The security guards ran to the garage. Black, acrid smoke was already billowing from the seams. Inside, they could hear Denise Peterson's frantic screams. Ram it! James commanded. The guard's SUV hit the garage door bumper first. The metal screeched, buckled, but held. Again, the second impact ripped the door off its hinges. James was the first to rush into the inferno. The smoke burned his eyes. The heat was unbearable. He saw Denise huddled in the far corner, covering her face with her hands from the encroaching flames. Come here, you fool! He yelled, grabbing the collar of her expensive coat. He dragged her out onto the snow, tossing her aside like a sack. Denise was coughing. Her face was black with soot, but she was alive. The security guards were already dousing the flames with fire extinguishers, preventing the fire from spreading to the house. Lights came on in the upstairs windows. My mother and I rushed outside in our robes, staring in horror at the smoking garage. Mom! I rushed to Vivian, hugging her. Are you okay? In the distance, sirens wailed. Firefighters and police. One of the neighbors, seeing the smoke, had called them. Denise Peterson sat on the snow and laughed hysterically. They can't prove anything, she screamed. Nothing. It was the wiring. I almost died. I'm the victim. A police car screeched to a halt by the gates. A weary-looking police captain got out. The firefighters followed, quickly unrolling their hoses to wet down the smoldering walls. The captain approached Denise. Miss Peterson? He asked respectfully. Yes, that's me. She nodded. I'm the victim. I had a fire. An insurance claim. The captain looked at the garage. The fire was out, but those same jerry cans Denise had used to pour the gasoline were lying on the snow. Old, orange, with distinctive scuff marks. The officer frowned, approached one of them, and shone his flashlight on it. Through the soot, a faded logo appeared on the side of the can. A blue triangle with the letter C and an inventory number stamped in paint. The captain slowly turned to James Davis. Mr. Davis, he said with respect, but surprise. Isn't that the logo of your old construction trust? The one that went bankrupt 15 years ago. James walked closer, squinting. Yes, he said slowly. Central Construction, my firm. We had a huge amount of fuel and material stolen from the warehouses back then. We thought the site manager did it. He shifted his gaze to Denise. And the site manager back then was your late husband. Denise. Peter. Denise stopped laughing. Her eyes widened with terror. They're just old cans, she whispered. We found them at the cabin. Not just old cans. The captain shook his head. See the marking? That's a specialized batch. High-octane fuel for heavy equipment. It wasn't sold retail. It was stolen and apparently stored all these years. The captain pulled out his handcuffs. Miss Peterson, you are under arrest, not for arson, but for newly discovered evidence in the case of felony theft from the warehouses of the State Enterprise Central Construction. That case had been dormant for 15 years. And now we have the evidence right here with your fingerprints on it. The handcuffs clicked. Denise wailed, not from fear of the fire, but from the realization of the monstrous irony of fate. She had spent her entire life playing the rich woman, stealing petty cash from the HOA, her daughter-in-law, and her neighbors. But it was an old, forgotten theft committed by her husband decades ago that ruined her. She had stored that gasoline to save a few bucks, and it became the fuel for her prison sentence. Take her away, the captain waved. Denise was dragged to the car. She fought, screamed curses, and spat, but no one was listening. James Davis walked up to us. It's over, he said, hugging us both. It's really over. The house is safe and the rat is gone. The police cruiser with its flashing lights disappeared into the darkness, taking Denise Peterson toward her criminal past. The silence that fell over the subdivision was deafening, smelling of smoke and wet ash. I stood on the porch, wrapped in a down jacket, and looked at the gates. There, parked by the curb, was Marcus's SUV. The engine was running, thick white smoke pouring from the tailpipe. He was running out of gas, but he couldn't turn off the engine or he would freeze to death. The windows of the SUV were fogged up from the inside. Marcus was there, alone, with no money, no home, no family. In the morning, he tried to approach the pedestrian gate. He looked terrible, unshaven, in wrinkled clothes with red, sleepless eyes. Seeing Vivian, who had come out to shovel the snow on the path, he pressed his face against the iron bars of the fence. Vivian, he croaked, please, just a piece of bread. I haven't eaten in a day. I don't even have money for instant soup. It was a mirror image of the nightmare scene where everything had begun. Only now he was the beggar. Now he stood in the cold and pleaded, while Vivian was the lady of the house in the warmth. Vivian froze with the shovel in her hands. I saw her heart flinch. Pity is the curse of good people. Go, Marcus, Vivian said softly, not looking at him. God will provide. She turned and went inside, but I noticed her shoulders shaking. I felt no pity. I had a job to do. There was still the last bit of legal mess to clean up. The divorce, the return of the land, and that cursed debt for construction materials. I sat in the living room, surrounded by folders of documents. James Davis sat opposite me in an armchair. My father looked older. All this, the siege, the fire, the arrest, had drained his strength. He was turning a cup of cold coffee in his hands and staring at the fire in the hearth. Dad, I called. I put down my pen. I need to know. James lifted his heavy gaze to me. Know what, daughter? Why now? I asked directly. Why did you only show up now? We were living in this hell for months. Mom sold her house in the country, gave them all her money. They humiliated her. They turned her into a servant. Where were you? Why didn't you intervene sooner if you had the connections? If you could have fixed everything with one phone call? James sighed. It sounded like the moan of an old tree. Shame, Sim, he replied gruffly. Ordinary man's shame. He set the cup on the table. I walked out on you 20 years ago, left like a coward from my work, my career. I thought the money I sent would replace a father and a husband. And when Vivian called me 6 months ago and told me she was selling her house to help you, I wanted to come. I was desperate to come, but I thought, who am I? I don't have the right to interfere. You're grown. He paused, his voice raw. Vivian is proud. She wouldn't accept help from the ex who traded his family for a badge. I was watching you, her father confessed. From a distance. I knew Marcus was a lowlife, but I didn't know the scale of it. I thought it was just family squabbles. But when you called that night, when I heard your voice, I knew if I didn't come now, I had no reason to live. He paused. There's one more thing, Sim. That debt. The debt for the brick and cement that Denise used to blackmail you. The $300,000 Mom supposedly borrowed from her to finish the house. I nodded, opening the folder with the promissory note. Mom signed it 2 years ago. Denise said the money from the sale of the country house wasn't enough. Prices went up, and she kindly loaned her savings. We still owe her that amount, even if she's in prison. Her heirs, Marcus, they can still claim it. That's a lie, James said softly. There was no debt. Prices didn't go up. There was more than enough money from the sale of your mother's house. But Denise, she's a sly fox. She knew Vivian didn't understand construction estimates. She simply stole some of the money, hid it, and then said there wasn't enough. But where did the materials come from? I didn't understand. The house was finished. I paid for them, my father said secretly. 2 years ago, when the construction stalled, the foreman, an old friend, called me, said, Jim, there's a problem. Materials ran out and your women are crying. No money. I wired him the money directly. $300,000. I told him to keep quiet so Vivian wouldn't know it was from me. I didn't want to humiliate her. I thought she would just finish the house and live peacefully. And Denise intercepted the documents. My father smiled bitterly. The foreman handed the receipts and delivery notices to her, as she was the one in charge of the build. She saw that everything was paid for, but Vivian didn't know it. And Denise put on a show. She came to Vivian and said, "I found the money. I paid for the materials, but now you owe me." And she got her to sign that promissory note. She sold you something I had already given. I closed my eyes. The sheer cynicism of this woman was unbelievable. She had taken my father's money, hidden the evidence, and then forced my mother to sign a debt bond for an already paid-for commodity. "Where is the proof, Dad?" I asked, opening my eyes. "Words aren't evidence. The foreman might confirm it. But we need documents, receipts, payment records." "I kept the bank statements," James said. "But that's not enough. We need the original bill of lading, the one with the recipient's signature." Denise must have hidden it. She never threw anything away. I remembered my mother-in-law's room. After the police searched, it was chaos, but many things remained. The police had only taken what concerned the gasoline and HOA case. They weren't interested in personal papers. "I'm going to look," I said, standing up. I walked into the room that had been Denise Peterson's fortress just yesterday. Now it was just a room with scattered laundry and the smell of old perfume. I methodically searched the place. Closets, drawers, shelves, empty. Only old magazines, utility receipts, some postcards. I opened the bottom drawer of a dresser. Under a stack of towels lay an old, worn Bible. I was surprised. Denise had never been religious. She only went to church on Easter to show off her new coat. I picked up the heavy book. I opened it at random. Tucked between the pages, in the chapter about Judas, lay a sheet of paper folded into quarters. I unfolded it. The paper was yellowed, but the text was clear. Bill of lading number 458. Billions. Fascia. Brick. Cement. Rebar. Amount. $310,000. Stamp. Paid. And at the bottom, in the payer column, it wasn't Denise's name. It was printed, J. F. Davis, P.C., my father's name, and in the received column was Denise Peterson's sprawling signature and the date. There it was. Denise had received the materials paid for by my father. She had signed for the receipt. She knew it was a gift, but she had hidden this document in the Bible, a book she figured no one in this house would ever open, and forced Vivian Jones to sign the debt. I gripped the paper in my hand until my knuckles went white. This wasn't just a document. It was a key to freedom. Complete, final freedom. No debt existed. This entire loan that Denise and Marcus had held over them for 2 years, the one that made Vivian scrub floors and endure humiliation, was a fiction. A lie. I returned to the living room. I silently placed the bill of lading in front of my father. James put on his glasses, looked at the paper, and his shoulders began to shake. He wasn't crying. He was laughing. A bitter, angry laugh. "In the Bible," he croaked. "She hid it in the Bible. Lord, what a woman." "It's over, Dad," I said. "They have nothing left. No Denise, no Marcus, no debt. We're clean." At that moment, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was timid, barely audible. I walked to the window. Marcus was standing at the door. He wasn't asking for food anymore. He just stood there, head down, holding a crumpled piece of paper. I opened the door, but didn't let him in. I stood on the threshold, blocking the way. The warmth of the house escaped, enveloping Marcus in steam. But he didn't even try to warm himself. "What do you want?" I asked. "Sim." Marcus's voice sounded like rustling dry leaves. "I found a job as a loader at the produce warehouse. They have a workers' dormitory." "Glad for you," I replied coldly. "I need a form." He held out a crumpled sheet, a family composition form for the manager. "So they'll give me a room." I took the sheet. It was an application. In the marital status box, Marcus had written with a trembling hand, "Divorced." "I'll sign the divorce papers," he said, looking at my feet. "I won't claim any assets. I know about the debt. My mother, she yelled at me when they took her away, that the debt isn't real, that she made it all up." He looked up at me. His eyes were empty. "I'm sorry, Sim. I'm not asking you to take me back. I didn't know you could be such a monster. I thought it was normal. I thought everyone lived like that. Hustling, scheming." "Not everyone, Marcus," I said. "People live and parasites exist." I took a pen from my pocket, rested the form against the doorframe, and quickly signed where the confirmation from the ex-spouse was required. "Here." Marcus took the paper. His fingers brushed my hand, and he drew them back as if from fire. Can I come in for a minute?" he asked hopefully. "Just to use the bathroom and get a drink of water." I looked at him, at his blue lips, at his shaking hands. "No," I said. "Sim, please." "No, Marcus. You will never set foot in this house again. There's a water fountain down the street. The restroom is at the bus station, and this house is a clean zone. People you betrayed live here." I started to close the door. "Sim!" he shouted in despair, trying to wedge his foot into the opening. "But I'm your husband, ex-husband. We were family." "We were," I answered, "until you decided that a china set was worth more than your mother-in-law." I slammed the door shut, and the lock clicked. I leaned my back against the door and closed my eyes. Outside, I heard footsteps, walking away. The crunch of snow under the feet of a man who had lost everything. I returned to the living room. Vivian was standing by the fireplace watching the fire. She had heard the conversation. "You are cruel, daughter," she said softly. "I am just Mom," I replied, hugging her. "Kindness must have fists, or it will be devoured." James stood up, walked over to them, and wrapped his big arms around both of us. "Everything will be different now," he said. "I promise." I looked at the bill of lading I had found lying on the table. That scrap of paper was worth more than all the money in the world. It was proof that my father's love, however clumsy and late, was real, and my mother-in-law's love was nothing but a business plan that had failed spectacularly. The winter continued outside the window, but inside the house, for the first time in long months, it finally felt truly warm. 3 months passed. The snow, which had seemed eternal, began to melt, revealing the black earth, and with it, the last traces of the nightmare also melted away. The house, which had recently been a prison, filled with the scent of spring and fresh baking. Today was a special day, a real housewarming party. Not the fake feast Denise Peterson had staged, but a celebration for those who truly deserved this home. I adjusted the tablecloth on the large mahogany table. That very china set was on it. Now, it was not a symbol of status or a tool for blackmail. It was simply beautiful dinnerware from which good people would eat. The guests had already started arriving. They were the neighbors, the very sanctuary wives who had recently looked down on Vivian Jones, seeing her as a servant. Today they walked into the house with apologetic smiles, carrying pies, flowers, and expensive gifts. "Vivian, dear, please forgive us," the congressman's wife chirped, handing over a massive bouquet of roses. "We were blind, we thought, but you understand." Denise presented everything so perfectly. Vivian sat at the head of the table. She wore a new dress, the color of spring foliage, which suited her well. Her hair was neatly styled, and a faint blush touched her cheeks. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen mother receiving her subjects. "God forgives," she smiled softly. "Please sit down, dear guests. The more the merrier." I watched this from the kitchen and felt my heart lighten. My mother had learned to smile again. She no longer flinched at loud noises or hid her hands under the table. She had reclaimed her dignity. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. I frowned. All the guests were already here. I walked to the monitor by the door. On the black and white screen, a figure stood at the gate. The man was dressed in a dirty jacket. On his head was a moth-eaten knit cap. He shifted from foot to foot, breathing on his frozen hands. "Marcus." I pressed the talk button. "What do you want?" Marcus lifted his head. His face was drawn, covered with a patchy beard. Dark circles lay under his eyes. "Sim." His voice trembled. "I see you're having a party. Cars are parked. I just thought maybe there's a little stew or bread left. I haven't eaten all day. The warehouse. Commissary is closed today." He looked pathetic, but I knew that behind that mask of misery still hid the same man who had snatched a plate from my mother's hands. "Wait," I said. I went into the kitchen. I took a plastic container, filled it with hot chili, added a large piece of cornbread, and a few small pies. Then I took an envelope from my purse. I went outside, pulling on my coat. The spring wind was fresh, but still cold. Marcus, seeing me, brightened. He took a step toward the gate, reaching out his hands as if hoping he would be invited inside now, into the warmth, to the table. "Thank you, Sim," he mumbled. "Thank you. I knew you weren't like them. Can I come in? Just in the foyer so the wind doesn't blow while I eat." I walked up to the fence, but didn't open the lock. I pushed the container and the envelope through the bars. "Here." Marcus grabbed the food, clutching it to his chest like a treasure. Then he looked at the envelope. "Is this money?" "It's a ticket," I said, "for the bus to rural Nebraska. It leaves tonight." "Nebraska?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Why Nebraska? I'm a manager. I have a college degree. You have nothing." I cut him off. "Here you're an outcast. No one will hire you. No one will rent to you. You'll burn out here. Drink yourself to death under a bridge. But there you have a chance to become a human being. Or to die alone. The choice is yours." I turned to leave. "Sim," he cried after her. "But why? Didn't you love me at all?" I stopped, turned back. I loved the man I invented, and he never existed. I walked into the house and firmly closed the door behind me. The click of the lock sounded like the final period in the chapter of my life titled Marcus. In the living room, the atmosphere was festive. James Davis, sitting at Vivian's right hand, stood up, holding a glass of wine. The conversations quieted. My father looked different. He had shaved his harsh stubble and wore a light-colored suit. He was no longer the intimidating prosecutor, the punishing sword of justice. Now he was just a man who wanted his family back. "Friends," he began, his voice slightly cracking, "I want to raise this toast to the lady of this house, to Vivian Jones." Vivian shyly lowered her eyes. "Viv," James turned to her. "I was a fool for many years. I thought I was protecting the country, but I left my most important fortress defenseless. I allowed enemies to walk into your home. I am at fault. I am not asking for forgiveness because something like this is hard to forgive. I am asking for a chance." Silence hung in the room. Everyone waited. I want to stay, James continued. Not as a guest, not as an ex-husband, but as a guard dog. I will shovel the snow, heat the sauna, and chase away the wolves. I want you to know that as long as I live, no one ever again will dare to hurt you. Can I stay? Vivian Jones looked up at him. Tears stood in her eyes, but her lips were smiling. She looked at me. I nodded. You can stay, Jim, Vivian said quietly but firmly. But I have a condition. Anything, he answered quickly. Whatever you say. The house. Vivian put her hand on the table. This house and the land. We will deed them to Sim completely tomorrow. A whisper of surprise went through the room. Why? James asked, though understanding had already flashed in his eyes. So that no man. Vivian looked him straight in the eye. No husband, no father, no in-law, no brother can ever tell us again. Get out. This is mine. So that my daughter can be the mistress of her own destiny. And so that I know she will always have a roof over her head that no one can take away. Do you agree? James Davis paused for a second, then smiled broadly. I don't just agree, Viv. I'm impressed. That is the wisest decision. To Simone Davis, the sole owner. The guests cheered. The glasses clinked. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I looked at my mother, my father, and my home. This was now a true fortress. Not because the walls were thick, but because the foundation was poured with truth and justice. In the corner of the living room, the television was on, showing the local news. The anchor read the crime blotter in a detached voice. Today, the county court delivered a verdict in the high-profile case of theft from the Sanctuary HOA and the Central Construction warehouses. Citizen Denise Peterson has been found guilty of 7 counts, including felony fraud and forgery. The court sentenced her to 10 years in prison with full confiscation of assets. Footage from the courtroom flashed on the screen. Denise Peterson sat in a holding cell, without makeup, in a gray uniform. She looked old and broken. She was screaming something at the camera, but there was no sound. Her son, who testified as a witness, also lost all assets in civil lawsuits from the affected residents. His current whereabouts are unknown. The image changed. It showed a tow truck hauling away Marcus's SUV from the impound lot, the same one he had been living in for his last few days. Vivian Jones looked at the screen, then turned her gaze to her daughter. Turn it off, Sim, she requested. We don't need that negativity. We're celebrating. I pressed the remote button. The screen went dark. I walked to the window. The spring sun was shining outside the glass. The snow was melting, turning into streams that washed away all the filth of winter. The lowlife had become the queen, and those who saw themselves as the masters of life were left with nothing. Justice isn't just when evil is punished. Justice is when kindness stops being toothless. I turned back to my family. Who wants more pie? I asked, and the house filled with laughter. So, tell me, if you were in my shoes, faced with that level of calculated cruelty, would you have been able to keep your cool and plan your revenge with such precision? Or would you have exploded the moment you walked through that door? Let me know in the comments below.